Hey, so it's been a little over a year since I did a proper world ranking for a Kingdom Hearts game, so here we are. If you missed it, or if you're new to the channel, I've also done distressingly extensive rankings and discussions of the KH1 and 2 worlds in 2019 and 2020 respectively. Naturally, we're moving on to Birth by Sleep, a game that I think kinda gets a bad rap. For me, it lands as my number 4 in the series after KH1, 3, and 2, and when looking at its worlds, I tend to enjoy its level design, stories, and overall integration with the original plot more than KH2, but maybe less so than the other numbered titles. I say this every time, but my perception of a world is informed by a few different aspects, mainly the qualities I listed before. One world may be stronger in the story department, but is less physically interesting to explore or actually play through, or vice versa. I don't use a point value system or any hard and fast rules, and I think of the 3 games I've done this exercise for, my list for Birth by Sleep has the highest capacity to be shuffled around. I'd say the bottom 4 are pretty locked in, as are the top 2, and then everything else is liable to change depending on how I'm feeling on any particular day. In this video, we're going to go through the first 6 of the 12 worlds, and then we'll take care of the last 6 in part 2. As always, I wanted to do one big video, but decided against it for reasons I'll get into at the end of this video if you care to hear about that. Alright, enough pomp and circumstance, let's get started.
Here goes!
I'm just going to include this one for the sake of fully completing the exercise, but I don't intend to spend much time on it because the game doesn't do that either. It's kind of weird that the Mysterious Tower isn't relegated to a cutscene-only world in the same vein as Destiny Islands in this game. When I first saw it, I figured they were going to expand on it and add a bit more to the place, but they actually ended up watering it down, cutting all of the stairways and chambers from Kingdom Hearts 2. And it's not like they're sorely missed, but I don't know, it's weird to go from more to less. I guess in a way it's nice that they didn't pad it out and waste your time with inconsequential mob waves, which this game will do from time to time. Atmospherically and thematically, BBS is full of parallels to prior games, but in terms of physical representation of older environments, Mysterious Tower is one of very few nostalgic callbacks. I mean, I guess it was nostalgic. KH2 only came out 4 years before Birth by Sleep, but that gap felt much longer as a kid. Plot-wise, the world is basically used as an exposition hub, not unlike its implementation in KH2 or 3, with Yen Sid at the helm, delivering any information that you and the characters need to know. At the very least, it's cool to see Donald and Goofy in their pre-Traverse Town getups again, as well as getting a glimpse at the shared past between Ericus, Xehanort, and Yen Sid. I also want to try and rank within the rankings and plot out who I think has the best and least best visit to each world. Given that the Mysterious Tower visits basically just amount to a collective of cutscenes, I'd give first place to Aqua just for the scene of Yen Sid delivering the news of Ericus' death, followed by Ven and then Terra.
Alright.
In a game that reuses Olympus Coliseum, again, it's kind of strange that we have this original creation being used instead for the tournament-based battling that we'd come to expect at this point in the series. I typically tend to like it when Kingdom Hearts does original locations and gets a bit abstract, but I always found the Mirage Arena to be kind of forgettable. Whereas places like the End of the World or the World That Never Was are strange and out of place among a smattering of Disney properties, the Mirage Arena is just that without any real reason or contextualization behind it. You could say I'm being picky, but in a series that feels the need to contextualize gacha games and rhythm games within its overall plot, I don't think it's too much to ask. I think you could even argue that it's non-canon since it is a mirage after all and nothing crucial or even important happens here. You could very easily beat each character's campaign without ever setting foot in the place. I also think it's kind of a waste of potential and that its surprises pale in comparison to what something like a KH1 Coliseum offered us. If we're not going to be afforded any context, then let's just fully lean into it. In a place dubbed the Mirage Arena, you could very easily throw in a bunch of scattershot Disney or Final Fantasy characters as opponents and handwave them as data or magic-based projections. In fact, Laguna from Final Fantasy VIII was supposed to appear as the arena's master of ceremonies, but was cut in favor of including him in Dissidia 012, which is weird because he's a fictional character. It's not like he has a manager who said he was double booked and only available for one project. I mean, I don't know, maybe they just didn't want to oversaturate our 2010 to 2011 lives with Laguna. But what was stopping them from throwing in isolated, contextless boss fights with a Shere Khan or a Ratigan or Golbez or any other bad guy that I still have PNGs of for my 1992 video that you should watch, or watch again, please, thanks. The Final Mix edition of the game, to its credit, did a bit of course correction with the addition of No Heart, the Armor of Ericus, and Monstro boss battles. I think just a handful more of things like that would have me favoring this over KH1 Olympus, which afforded us the chance to fight 4 characters from Final Fantasy and 5 from Hercules. You could argue that the Mirage Arena's bosses are actually more impressive, and I wouldn't really fight you on that. You can easily flip the perspective and say that it's far more interesting to see Xehanort's Keyblade armor than a barrel-phobic Sam Gamgee and a lumbering hunk of obsidian. For whatever reason, out of the 3 Final Mix bosses, I tend to find Monstro the coolest and most interesting, maybe because I was kind of over mysterious armored Keyblade wielders by this point, and maybe because I also got to release my aggression on a world/whale that stole many hours of my youth from me as I meandered around its intestinal cavities. I write a lot of weird sentences in this line of work. I do want to highlight the small touch of giving the player the ability to use these RGB sliders to customize the color of the armor. It's no 0.2 Minnie Mouse ears, but it's a cool way to allow for a little bit of personalization to each player's experience. It was also thoughtful of them to sort of centralize most of the game's mini-games here so you can easily hop between arena battles, command board, and rumble racing if you're into that. Although it's kind of weird to feature one of the Disney Town diversions here and not all three, not that I'm truly aching to see any of them more often than absolutely necessary. Last note, I love the field music here called Dearly Dreams, which I definitely and fittingly zonked out to on numerous occasions as my PlayStation Portable burned a hole through my blanket, shirt, and epidermis.
Oh, come on.
From one arena-based world to another, we have our first real BBS world on the list, Olympus Coliseum. I've mentioned in past videos that I really appreciate the 3-game arc that Olympus undergoes as a world, progressing from just the Coliseum to the Underworld to actual Olympus. Of course, calling it a 3-game arc ignores the 4 other games that the world appears in, 3 of which released between Cage 2 and 3, all of which occur in pretty much the same physical space that Cage 1's version of the world does. For whatever reason, we looked at these same textures and heard this same field track on 3 separate occasions between 2009 and 2011, so needless to say, we're in the middle of peak Olympus fatigue here. But beyond that, the world was only expanded to feature one additional room, the prestigious winner of the regular Pat Best Room in BBS Olympus Award, the Town Near Thebes, which is just another big empty room to fight mobs in a world where the main premise is already fighting mobs in big empty rooms as part of a tournament-style competition. All 3 visits kick off with a team up with Herc or Herc and Zack against a big horde of unversed that are vaguely threatening the area. For Terra and Aqua, this is followed by partaking in your typical Olympus tournament, except for whatever ungodly reason these matches are timed. I think every time I've played through this game casually, I'd get walled at this point, not because I was playing poorly or being killed by enemies, but because I could not possibly defeat everything in time due to my low level. I think it's one thing to go out and grind because you need a leg up on whatever's giving you trouble by increasing your stats, but it's another, much worse thing to essentially be punished for making it this far in the game at a lower level. And so what should have been a few minutes of some tactical planning and battling in Olympus somehow gets padded out to me spamming the Mickey D-Link in one of the previous Princess worlds for about an hour. So that's all certifiably terrible in my book. Meanwhile, Ventus is undergoing the worst iteration of Phil's non-combat focused training, which at the very least lets you do a barrel roll to more easily rack up points. Much like his fellow characters do, the game treats Ven like a baby and doesn't allow him to participate in the tournament, which I can at least appreciate for the sake of not making all 3 characters do the same exact thing. Instead, he fights some jelly shades in the town that's geographically close to Thebes. Back on the Terra and Aqua routes, both get to participate in some boss fights, with Terra going head-to-head with both plain and darkness flavors of Zack Fair, and Aqua getting the former alongside a Hades and Ice Colossus double boss. For this reason, alongside some of each character's story beats here, I'd rank Aqua's as the best visit, mostly because she has the most to do, which is not always the case for her. Speaking of what's going on story-wise here, was Phil always a weird sexist creep? Like, I don't remember him being this pervy in the movie or in any other game, but maybe I'm misremembering. But he comes on real strong here. Between him, Zack, and Hades, Aqua pretty much has her own YouTube comment section. She also deals with all of this far more elegantly than she has any reason to. Like, if I'm her, I'm thinking, I don't live here, I'm just here to fight a couple of bosses and leave, so anyone who's bothering me can fuck off. I'm probably never gonna see you again anyway. As for Ven, his story here primarily revolves around just finding some friends, which seems almost Cage 3-esque in its relative aimlessness, but is pretty depressing considering this is basically his main motivation for the second act of the game after the emotional reunions at Radiant Garden. Terra's trip here is probably the one I enjoy least, since I'm really feeling the fatigue of the Olympus formula at this point. At least when comparing Cloud and Auron, the former was just manipulated verbally, whereas the latter was literally being voodoo dolled, but Hades controlling Zack really is just the plainest retread of the Auron plot from Cage 2. He was fun to see though, especially considering he's the only Final Fantasy representation this game would have outside of the Moogles. Not that Kingdom Hearts is always super careful and conscious about chronology when it comes to Final Fantasy games, but it's especially cool that BBS featured a character that is very much associated with the past, and wouldn't work as well to have roaming around with the quote-unquote modern FF cast in the series. I will say, I do love the scene when Terra is about to fight the newly possessed Zack and he has a flashback to his own possession by Maleficent during Enchanted Dominion. It's rare that we see any real continuity between Disney worlds like that. Our protagonists typically just vaguely reference their prior adventures, but to see a specific moment being recalled definitely helps establish a stronger narrative through line. At the very least, it feels like the characters are learning, and considering everyone thinks Terra is dumb, at least this moment shows that he's mastered pattern recognition.
It can't be.
So, if not for the aforementioned Olympus exhaustion, I probably would have had the prologue world Land of Departure one spot lower. As I've stated in the past, Birth by Sleep is my 4th favorite entry in the series after the mainline 3, but its prologue does the game and its story close to no favors whatsoever. I think my main issue is how little time we spend here, and maybe this was an overcorrection in the wake of Cage 2, whose detractors' most common complaint at the time was the length of the prologue before we got to any real action. Ironically, that's one of the parts that I like the most. In BBS, we do a controls tutorial, hit some balls, and then we're out of there. But there's there's a reason why a lot of people were able to feel some sort of connection with or affection for Roxas after Cage 2, even without taking Days or IGN reviews into account, and it's because we got to spend so much time with him during that prologue and got to see his relationships with his friends. And yet, somehow, despite getting to play as these 3 characters for an entire game, I feel like people left BBS feeling less of a connection and having a weaker understanding of who the Wayfinders are as characters. And I think a lot of that boils down to a comparatively weak introduction in those early hours of the game. I am told that these characters care about each other and have this long and shared history, but I just haven't been given enough to really believe it or care about it. Mind you, I came to appreciate and care about the characters later on, but very little of it had to do with their opening moments here, and a lot of it to do with filling in the blanks on my own. And maybe that was the intent, and again, maybe they were afraid of making us spend more than an hour here after the admittedly slow-paced prologue that was Cage 2 Twilight Town, especially in a game where you'd need to experience it 3 times if you want to see everything it has to offer. But I don't know, you can skip the little Ventus tutorial part after you complete it once, so maybe just give us a richer 2 or 3 hour opening with TVA and then let us skip it on subsequent campaigns. This was one of my complaints about Cage 1 Destiny Islands, although it was much less egregious in that game. We at least got a decent amount of time with Sora, Riku, and Kairi. We had an idea of what their day-to-day was like, and I think just seeing more than one day pass goes a long way in imparting a sense of normality and routine for them. I think just one more day on the islands could have served us well, especially in strengthening the relationship between Sora and Kairi, and I think the same can be said of the Land of Departure and the Wayfinders. Everything just happens too quickly, even though the situation is much less urgent than a KH1. I don't know what these characters do all day or really understand how they feel about each other outside of some pretty hastily presented and canned references to their counterpart trio from KH1. In a way, I think our understanding of SRK is supposed to do most of the heavy lifting with regards to our understanding of TVA, at least in these early hours. And again, I want to stress that I like these characters fine enough, and I don't even think the game is really that poorly written or paced outside of this first world. But obviously and unfortunately, this is the foundation that the rest of the game is built on, which I think leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. Visually, I find the world nice and interesting enough, but as is the case with its inhabitants, I wish the game would have given us a little bit more depth. Compared to Twilight Town and even Destiny Islands, the Land of Departure is comically small and we're given very little room to explore, on top of there being literally no one to talk to outside of cutscenes while we're there. And I don't know if I'm being inconsistent here or picky, but with those former 2 worlds, they sort of explain themselves, or rather don't require a lot of explanation. Destiny Islands is a series of tropical islands, and Twilight Town is a city stuck in perpetual twilight. They're neat and memorable, but they don't really purport to be anything other than what's on the tin. But with the Land of Departure, I feel like I'm supposed to interpret this place as being grand and important, but I'm never given anything else to go on. Is it really just this sort of mountainy place with a castle populated by a whopping 4 people? Does anyone else live here, or is it just TVA and Ericus hanging out and holding Keyblade school for years and years? And this sort of ties into the issues I brought up with the characters. Have Terra and Aqua always lived here, or did they come here from somewhere else? I mean, Ericus isn't their actual father, and I know Kingdom Hearts likes to ignore parents as often as possible, but where are they from? At least Ven has some backstory to him, but it's like these 2 were test tube babies made on site and raised into adulthood for the sole purpose of being Keyblade masters. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something about the entire premise of the world that skews away from mysterious and toward frustrating or underdeveloped for me. I love End of the World, but really couldn't care less about this place. Maybe a final dungeon is better suited for this degree of mystique than the starting world. Or maybe there's more to this place and it's just taking 11 plus years to fully reveal its significance. I wish I was joking, but we know that this happens sometimes. But as it stands right now, the Land of Departure has a more interesting future as Castle Oblivion than as its iteration presented here in Birth by Sleep.
What did you expect?
Is Disney Town too high? I feel like I have it too high. I debated on whether or not I should have had this beneath Olympus Coliseum and Land of Departure, but Disney Town is at least new and visually interesting when compared to the former, and not as bare bones when compared to the latter. It's not particularly interesting to see any of the characters here since they're ageless Disney cartoons and none of them really change from this game to the next. Like, Huey, Dewey, and Louie are here being ice cream entrepreneurs, and 10 years later they're in the foreign item shop business, for whatever that's worth. At the very least, it's cool to see an expanded version of the Disney castle we saw in Cage 1 and 2, and it's nice to know that the entire world isn't confined to one single structure like it apparently is in some cases. And visually, it's one of the most eye-catching and colorful environments in any of the games, and I might just not be brushed up on my Disney history here, but I don't even know if it's really based on anything. It kind of reminds me more of sections of the theme parks like Magic Kingdom more than anything else. Regardless, they did a great job designing a world populated by all of the classic characters from the Mickey Mouse cartoon shared universe, I guess? Is that what you would call it? Like all the characters from the old-timey cartoons? They need to do some branding on that and come up with something a bit punchier. The MICKEYCU? Story-wise, this is obviously one of the weakest worlds, and I basically only determine which visit I like best by ranking the 3 minigames associated with each character, since that's all you need to do here to move on. So I'd go Aqua, then Ven, then Terra, aka Fruit Ball, then Ice Cream Beat, then Rumble Racing. Fuck Rumble Racing. I mean, it's perfectly serviceable, but after playing literally any other racing game imaginable other than, I don't know, big rigs over-the-road racing, this is comparatively the blandest, most snooze-worthy racing game I've had the misfortune to play. This isn't to say that I'm singing the praises of either of the other games, because I very am not. Ice Cream Beat is a slightly punched up KH2 Atlantica, thankfully without the vocal talents of 3 pre-adolescent ducks. Fruit Ball is just random chaos every time I play it, but there is some sort of beauty in pineapples and watermelons flying around a volleyball court and concussing anyone unfortunate enough to be in the way. One of the most positive aspects of Disney Town for me is actually the physical layout of the world, specifically the underground portion, which contains some of my favorite slices of level design in the game. Gizmo Gallery looks like it was pulled right from KH1, and it even has this environmental puzzle where you have to use thunder on this gauge thing here in order to progress through the room. It also leads to Pete's Rec Room, which is unlike any other room in the series and is essentially and fittingly a gigantic troll. I don't know what any of these mechanisms down here are meant to accomplish, but they're fun to jump on, and sometimes that's all that matters, the Mario 3D World philosophy on games. The only real story we get here is that Disney Town is holding some sort of promotional event to draw in more tourists during the down season called the Million Dreams Award, which I swear sounds like something that actual Disney World did. You know, wait. Yeah, so I just googled it, and it was literally called the Year of a Million Dreams, which ran from October 2006 to December of 2008, so more than a year. But I remember I was actually at Disney World at some point during its run, and my family was randomly given this fucking magical little plastic lanyard thing called the Dream Fast Pass that just let you skip the line for 6 rides automatically, and it was the coolest shit ever. I felt like we were like the mouse's chosen people. Anyway, this was much cooler than the Birth by Sleep ripoff, which amounted to playing bad minigames and then going to a poorly attended ceremony where Pete tries to hashtag stop the steal. Honestly, this might be peak Pete here. It's not like it's comedy gold, but I found it decently entertaining how aggressively helpful he was trying to be so he could win this community vote, which he apparently had a shot at if he wasn't such a gigantic dickhead. This is all topped off with the iconic scene of Minnie literally banishing Pete to the Shadow Realm, which makes up for its stiltedness and awkward pacing by how fucking hilarious it is. I guess it's also cool to see the origins of Pete and Maleficent. Apparently she goes dumpster diving in the lanes between every few days to see if there are any obese cats to recruit. There's another weird sentence. Let's move on.
Ta-da!
Get ready for some mood whiplash. Echoing my thoughts on the first world, I always felt kind of underwhelmed by the last one, the Keyblade Graveyard. It's something that I find a lot more interesting in concept than in practice, like seeing it in the KH2 secret ending and wondering what exactly happened here. Actually walking around in it, I don't think it's unfair to say that the end of the world and the world that never was are both visually and physically more interesting and fun to explore, whereas the graveyard is just a big crater with some tornadoes in it and then cutscenes and boss battles. It's not all too different from how KH3's graveyard is treated, but I tend to be having a lot more fun with that game's cutscenes and boss battles. In fairness, I don't know exactly how you take this purposefully desolate and flat landscape and turn it into a geographically complex and engaging final dungeon. The world's relative simplicity does not make it objectively bad by any means, I just found it kind of underwhelming as an actual level. I think there's also something to be said about a final dungeon that you actually get to visit before, well, final dungeon time. It kind of makes sense that I was underwhelmed by it, considering we stopped by here for a boss fight and a handful of cutscenes halfway through the game. And considering most people who played Birth by Sleep probably obsessively pored over the KH2 secret ending, we already kinda know what the deal is with this place. Calling it the Badlands for a little while isn't really fooling anyone, it isn't obscuring the true significance of the place, and showing up there early makes the finale feel a bit more anticlimactic. I think that's probably why End of the World is still my favorite of the series' final worlds, because we not only don't get to visit it, but we don't even get cutscenes of it until we have boots on the ground, or rather oversized anime shoes on the ethereal void. This is not to say that I dislike this world even though it appears in this first half of the rankings. Obviously, the consequential scenes and boss fights that occur here are what elevate it to this spot on the list. I will say though that I wish there was some way to experience the world as a more complete collaborative package with all 3 characters at once, because the individual parts don't quite live up to the absolute blockbuster that was the KH2 secret ending. That scene felt like such a team effort, a clash of the old guy and his mysterious apprentice versus Riku's dad, Kairi's mom, and Roxas's clone brother, as they were expertly theorized to be at the time. I mean, maybe not in the mainstream of the community, but I was there reading GameFAQs posts, I didn't make any of that up. Anyway, in practice and in gameplay, the finale follows the formula of the bulk of the rest of the game, having the characters splinter off into more intimate one-on-ones between Terra and Master Xehanort, Ventus and Vanitas, and Aqua and Braig. Yeah, that one's kind of the leftover awkward blind date pairing. Sorry, Braig, half blind date. I wish there was at least a moment that harkened back to the fight with the Trinity armor in Radiant Garden where the protagonists got to combine their strength, even if it was just against like an unversed demon tide or some dumb shit like that. In a way, I think the KH2 secret ending was a blessing and a curse. Mostly a blessing at the time for how graphically stunning, mysterious, and chaotic it was, and a curse for railroading the BBS iteration into making sure everything followed the beats of the cutscene. And of course, that's not going to look as cool in the in-game engine. That was a lot of negativity, but I don't want that to detract from how cool I still think a lot of this is anyway. The highlight for me is definitely the confrontation between Terra and Xehanort, the former having been bamboozled into killing his adoptive dad, and the latter just needling him and, leading him down the path to eventually becoming two separate bad guys for two major installments of a massive media franchise. Like, say what you will about Jason Dohring and his delivery, but he's probably doing the best he does in the game here, and maybe you think that's a low bar, I won't fight you on that. And it's such an impossible situation for him because he went from feeling betrayed by his mentor to finding a new one to then realizing his words of affirmation and encouragement was all just a bunch of bullshit to trick him into taking out his old mentor and driving him off the deep end so that he's a prime candidate to be bodyjacked by this old bastard. I know Xehanort is goading him into being pissed off, but how could he not be pissed off? Xehanort's like, haha, yeah, be pissed off, this is great, and if I were Terra, I think that would just make me more pissed off. I really feel for the guy, and I'll die on the Terra defense hill, but that's probably a story for another day. And I mean, the Ansem SOD callback, or I guess call forward, is single-handedly enough to put this barren wasteland above Disney Town and everything preceding it. As all that silly drama's happening, Ven unthaws himself to fight his brother, who reveals that he is Sora's DeviantArt OC, and then reveals himself as the origin point of the Unversed as Ven receives multiple flood hugs that are equal parts non-consensual and non-threatening. I have to say, the Unversed don't really do it for me in the way that KH1 Heartless or KH2 Nobodies do, but it's truly impressive that they're all just different expressions of how much a pessimistic asshole Vanitas is. At a point, you have to praise his angst and negativity for how creatively it manages to manifest itself. This leads us to another KH1 callback, which we'd love to see, if you don't mind me speaking for you, and a boss battle inside Vanitas and Ven's shared mind palace, reminiscent of the clash between Sora and Roxas in KH2. One thing I don't care for is that D-Link segment at the end, which is thematically cool, but is practically begging you to fuck it up on your first attempt, promptly sending you back to the beginning of the fight. Even though Aqua gets two fully fledged boss fights here, not just different versions or combinations of the same guy multiple times, I find her visit here the least memorable, probably because she doesn't have an obvious opponent here in the way that Terra and Ven do. As I mentioned, she first off gets Braig, which is a fight you've already experienced the better version of as Terra. I honestly completely forgot that she fights Ventus Vanitas here alongside King Michael, which I concede is more of a knock on my own memory than the game. In fairness, you fought this little prick like a million times by now if you've played the game in the TVA order, which I figure most people do. In light of her less than stellar outing here, Aqua does get an additional stretch of gameplay after the graveyard unlike her friends, so it's not too big a deal that she gets the shorter end of the stick here. It's also hard to neatly fit that stuff into any of the entries in this project, but rest assured if I did include it, it would bring the KBG up another few slots. I have to admit, as I wrote/am writing this portion of the script, I wondered if I was being too hard on the world and questioned the overall ordering and my perspective on video games in general, which happens basically every time I make a video, so par for the course there. I'm sitting here wondering if not having the finale at least in the top third is going to cheapen the upcoming discussions about all of the cool moments that build up to the finale. How could I really convince you or myself that we care about those if I have The Last World as number 7 overall? But now I'm deciding that I'm overthinking my fears of overthinking it and settling on BBS being a game in which I generally enjoy the journey more than the destination, which may be an unpopular take, I'm not sure. Again, this is the first world in the video where I think my list of positives truly outweighs the negatives, and this is obviously at the top of the pile when it comes to story significance. But divorcing this world of the context it provides for previous and future games and looking at it and its neighbors as standalone experiences, I think I'm going to have higher praise for the back half of the list, especially when it comes to conversations about themes and actual level design. Also, when it comes to the world rankings, it truthfully is an arbitrary exercise for the most part, and mainly just my vehicle for getting to talk about all of them. You and I both click on these types of videos because our brain likes lists and seeing things be ranked and ordered, but this series was always meant to be more of me rambling subjectively about my childhood, rather than a scientific and calculated ordering of each level, some of which are vastly different from others in tone and structure. Much like Kingdom Hearts, this is starting to get frighteningly meta, so let's just end things here. Hey, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, do the thing. It helps me eat the food. So, again, sorry it's a two-part thing. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I wanted, and I always want to do this when I do the world ranking, is make it like a big, long project, and then as I'm writing the script, it starts to get overwhelming, and it's hard to finish that because I know that it's going to be like this massive undertaking that's like, you know, up to 10,000 plus words. I think this one was like 6,000 words. I always get to like towards the end, I'm like, I need to get something out, I need to start editing this, and then I'm like, I'll just split it in two. So I do have most of the rest of the script written, but I wanted to just get this out. So I do apologize for the wait between this and the 1992 video. I also had to like play through all of BBS because it's probably one of the games that's least fresh in my memory, so I had to like go through and get the footage there. But yeah, look forward to part 2. Hopefully it's less of a wait than the one for this part. Let me do the link thing. Got my Twitter, got my Discord, I got Patreon. Patreon, obviously, I like to say it every time. It's a great way to support the channel. If you enjoy the content, keeps me afloat, lets me, you know, keep going regardless of whatever YouTube is deciding to pay me on any given day. Thank you all again for watching, and thank you for your patience, and I will now kick it to the credits and my lovely, lovely patrons. Bye-bye.